It's 4 a.m. and you're sucking baby snot through a tube because she's congested. If you love her that much, love her enough to make sure she's buckled in the right car seat. Find out more at nhtsa.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Will the Supreme Court step into a battle over abortion rights in Texas?
There's so many different twists in this case. I mean, the biggest one is that Texas structured this law in an unusual way to make it more difficult to challenge in court. And so that has complicated all these proceedings entirely aside from the legal questions about abortion rights and Roe v. Wade and the like.
And how many Afghans did the U.S. leave behind? Plus, why the FTC is asking about broken ice cream machines. It's Wednesday, September 1st. I'm Anne-Marie Fertoli for The Wall Street Journal. This is the PM edition of What's News, the top headlines and business stories that moved the world today. The Biden administration says that since the end of July, the U.S. and its allies evacuated more than 123,000 people from Afghanistan, most of whom were Afghans. But a senior State Department official estimates that the majority of Afghan interpreters and others who applied for visas to leave the country are still there. They include people who worked for the U.S. military and other diplomatic and foreign aid workers. The official said the U.S. still doesn't have reliable data on who was evacuated. Both parties have criticized the administration for slow processing of visas. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and a group of Russian oil producers have agreed to gradual increases in oil production. After a virtual meeting today, the group said it will boost output in monthly installments of 400,000 barrels a day through the latter end of 2022. The decision comes despite U.S. pressure to boost production even faster. But OPEC delegates said it's too early to do so since many countries are still fighting the impacts of the pandemic. In Louisiana, the state's biggest energy company, Entergy, says it has restored power to a New Orleans suburb, bringing a few thousand people back online. But about 1 million customers are still in the dark 3 days after Ida made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane. Officials say it could be a month before electricity is restored to the hardest-hit areas. Entergy says it's prioritizing getting power back to hospitals, communications networks, and police and fire stations. In Colorado, a grand jury has indicted 5 current and former first responders in the death of Elijah McClain, a black man who died in police custody in 2019 after he was stopped while coming home from a convenience store. An autopsy report on the cause of death was inconclusive, and the local district attorney at the time declined to press charges. That decision roiled Aurora, a city of about 380,000 people outside Denver, and attracted nationwide scrutiny. Today's indictment follows a new investigation into McClain's death and comes amid a growing national debate over police treatment of Black Americans following the death of George Floyd. In business news, Walmart says it's hiring 20,000 permanent workers for its supply chain operations, from order pickers to freight handlers to forklift operators. Retailers have begun ramping up for the holiday season, even as they struggle with a tight labor market, congested shipping networks, and supply chain volatility. The push comes as delivery and distribution are playing a greater role in competition between retailers. And we report exclusively that Apple is working on new health features for its smartwatch, including a tool to measure blood pressure and a thermometer to help with fertility planning. That's according to people familiar with the plan and internal company documents. Analysts say Apple is expected to release the 7th version of its watch in coming weeks, but most of the health-related improvements aren't expected until next year. Coming up, Texas implements one of the most restrictive abortion bans in the nation. Will the Supreme Court step in?
I'm Alex Ewell, host of the Readback from Barron's. It's been an extraordinary year for stock markets, particularly for companies going public. IPOs soared, and they show no sign of slowing down. But the boom didn't come out of the blue, and there was plenty of pain on the road to IPO success. So how do you put a price on innovation? This season on the Readback, we'll find out. We're winding back the clock on a decade of IPOs, from Moderna and Facebook to Uber and Airbnb. The Readback is available wherever you get podcasts.
In Texas, a new abortion law has gone into effect, the most restrictive in the nation. The so-called fetal heartbeat law prohibits getting an abortion any time after about 6 weeks of pregnancy. Clinics and reproductive rights advocates made an emergency request to the Supreme Court earlier this week to block the law, but so far, the justices have not stepped in. Joining me now on what the next steps could be for the highest court and what this means for Roe v. Wade is Wall Street Journal legal affairs reporter Brent Kendall. Hi, Brent. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, Brent, the Supreme Court has not yet stepped in here, but banning abortions this early does conflict with the court's precedent, right?
It does. Under longstanding precedent, states can regulate but not outright ban abortion in the weeks and months before what's called fetal viability, which means, the ability of a fetus to meaningfully live outside of the womb. The text of the law says if there is a detectable heartbeat, you can't perform an abortion. And so the way the law is defined, that includes sort of embryonic cardiac activity, which happens at about 6 weeks, which is far sooner than you can ban abortion right now. And look, many women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. So abortion rights advocates say, look, at 6 weeks, all you have is a tiny embryo. It's not a fetus. It's not correct to even really call this a heartbeat. That's just one of the many broader disputes here, aside from the legal questions.
So what exactly can you tell us about what the court has been asked to do regarding this emergency request?
This all happened pretty quickly and escalated pretty quickly. Texas enacted this law in May. It was set to go into effect today. There had been some lower court proceedings. There was a lawsuit in July, and things had been moving along. There was a trial judge who was set to hold a hearing in the last few days on whether to issue an injunction blocking the law. Then an appeals court stepped in and both prevented that trial court hearing and rejected a request by abortion providers to put the law on hold. So suddenly, that left the clinics with no other option than to make sort of an emergency quick run to the Supreme Court, which they did, and said, hey, look, this law clearly conflicts with what the court has said in the past. Please put this on hold while these court proceedings continue. There's so many different twists in this case. The biggest one is that Texas structured this law in an unusual way to make it more difficult to challenge in court. And so that has complicated all these proceedings entirely aside from the legal questions about abortion rights and Roe v. Wade and the like.
Tell us a little bit more about that, about the way the law is structured that makes it more difficult to challenge.
So the thing you should know about abortion regulation is typically what happens is a state would pass a regulation, and then, instead of waiting for the regulation to go into effect, abortion rights supporters, clinics, providers, and the like would go ahead and file a lawsuit. It's called a pre-enforcement challenge. And so what you do in those circumstances is you would sue the state officials who would be in charge of enforcing the law. So what Texas did here, they know this dynamic and how this works. So lawmakers threw in a provision that says, look, Texas government officials can't actually enforce this law. What we're going to do instead is basically create incentives that effectively deputize the public to enforce it. So the way the law is written, any person in Texas can file a private civil lawsuit alleging that, a provider or a clinic is violating this 6-week ban, and then go to court. And if they win, they get a minimum of $10,000 in damages for each abortion that's been performed. And so the argument of the state is like, look, you can't bring a lawsuit and block this law against state officials ahead of time because state officials can't do anything here. And so the abortion rights folks basically say, look, it can't be the case. You can craft a law in a way that gives any person in the entire state the right to enforce it, but at the same time prevents us from challenging it. So, and look, you could still challenge the law after, if you were a clinic and you got sued by, some citizen in Texas, you could challenge the law after the fact, but, what the abortion rights groups say on that is that's a real financial jeopardy kind of thing, this after-the-fact litigation if you lost. So that's where we're in, and so the Supreme Court is trying to decide whether to block this law for now. And one of the questions that is certainly, at play here is whether they even feel like they are in a position to do so, given the unusual kind of private enforcement mechanism here.
So, Brent, during the Trump administration, we saw several Republican-led states approve stricter abortion laws. The balance of the court has also shifted more conservative. Have the battle lines over the issue of abortion changed? And are we now more likely to see a challenge to Roe v. Wade before the Supreme Court?
Yes, and we already are seeing that challenge. For years and years and years, the question of Roe being overruled or gutted was really off the table. President Trump was able to put 3 different justices on the court, and it's clearly gotten more conservative. And so the question now is whether this new conservative majority, what it wants to do here. And so we've had one signal already. I mean, the court has accepted a case that it will hear later this term out of Mississippi, and that is on a 15-week abortion ban. And even that is far more restrictive than what would be allowed for now. Even the fact that the court has agreed to hear this case has, abortion rights supporters nervous, because if you weren't going to do anything to make changes to the law, you would just leave lower court rulings against Mississippi in place, and that would be the end of it. So in the written briefing in that case so far, what you see is the anti-abortion side, are making direct and explicit arguments to either overrule Roe or to, drastically trim it. And so, while a lot of the focus here the last 48 hours has been on Texas, it's this Mississippi case that, everybody had been expecting would be the bigger, longer-term deal that the court would hear arguments later, probably at the end of the year, and then issue a ruling by next summer. And then we'd really have a clear picture on where this new court was on abortion. And so, all that is going forward, and we'll just have to wait and see how this whole Texas saga kind of fits into it.
Wall Street Journal legal affairs reporter Brent Kendall. Brent, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And finally, many McDonald's customers know the disappointing feeling. You order a cone, milkshake, or McFlurry, but the ice cream machine is out of order. In fact, McDonald's soft-serve breakdowns are so common, they've become the butt of late-night jokes and the subject of petitions from annoyed customers. Now, the Federal Trade Commission has stepped in. The FTC has sent preliminary letters to McDonald's franchisees asking about the broken machines and how often they get repaired. Here's Wall Street Journal restaurant reporter Heather Haddon.
So McDonald's says that they, understand that this has been a frustration for customers, that they have developed a team to try to increase training of restaurant workers and inspections and checks on the machines to try to get this better. And they are trying to develop their own system of real-time alerts for when a machine is down, because they do know that this has been a problem. These machines are complex.
But they are important for business. According to research firm Technomic, ice cream treats account for about 60% of McDonald's dessert sales in the U.S. And that's what's news for this Wednesday afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow morning. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us. I'm Anne-Marie Fertoli for The Wall Street Journal.